Our guest this episode is Carolyn Klassen, a public speaker, therapist, and founder of Wired for Connection. With over 20 years of experience as a marriage and family therapist, Carolyn has helped countless individuals and couples break down the barriers to deeper and more meaningful connections. She's also the creator of the Loneliness Course and has shared her insights in a TEDx talk and on the radio. Carolyn's work highlights the vital role of connection in our lives, especially in today's world. She's here to discuss how we can foster resilience and heal through connection in both personal and professional relationships. I want to welcome to the podcast, Carolyn. Thanks for being here. Welcome to the Engaging Personalities Podcast. I'm Anders Belanger, founder and CEO of Engagify, where we're on a mission to rehumanize business through engagement. We believe that we can all be more successful if we can command attention and deepen connection. So stick around to the end of the show and we'll reveal how you can be our next guest on a future episode. So let's get ready to engage.
Anders, it is so good to be with you. You yourself, I have learned from you about connection. So it's a delight to be with you. I have received several personal phone calls from you, at times just sort of connecting as we're part of the same association and just checking in a very high touch sort of way. And I think in this world, it's been something that I've noticed and has mattered, and sort of has you on my radar as somebody that reaches out and makes relationships important and meaningful. And so it's a delight to be with you today.
Oh, well, thanks so much, Carolyn. On that phone call, we were chatting, and this is where I got the idea, like, I got to bring you on the podcast, right? And just that, we live in, and I mean, this is almost a bit of a cliche now, we're in such a connected world, and yet we are so disconnected, like connected wired wise, like, wired with wires, right? Like, and internet and all of those things, right? Social media, where, the more we seem to have the ability to know what everyone's doing, the less we're actually feeling connected, right? Like, have you noticed over your 20 years, like, things changing? Like, is there a trajectory there, or is it just always been the case?
There is a trajectory, and loneliness rose during the pandemic for sure, but it was rising before the pandemic, and it didn't drop after the pandemic as we might have hoped or expected. And so it's not to say that the pandemic didn't matter, but loneliness has been a trend that has been escalating. And 2012 actually is the pivot point, where instead of going up gradually, it started spiking up. 2012 being the sort of the pivotal year where people moved from less than half to more than half of people having smartphones, and where social media created a critical mass, and people started looking online for social connection through social media. And so I think that whole hyper-connectedness that we feel through social media and through internet and computer and all that sort of stuff has actually backfired in terms of meaningful connection, and has increased our loneliness rather than decrease it.
I mean, when I think about social media, I'm always thinking about this, like, the comparison thing, right? Everyone's putting out the, best version of whatever they can be. And we're always like, oh, I wish I was that, and you're comparing. And so I get those feelings of it happening. But is it what you're saying is that there's this kind of substitution where we think this is good enough, but it's not feeding us? Is that kind of the main issue?
I think of a lot of electronic connection. I think of it as like the potato chips of connection, right? Really delicious, highly tasty, but doesn't actually fill you in a nutritious way like a salad would. So when you go to a restaurant, something deep fried and tasty is like that's the tempting thing to pick. But when you're looking for health, you maybe decide to not to go for the deep fried stuff or the potato chips. You decide to go for something that's more nutritious. And I think often we're faced when at the end of a busy day, people have had lots of contacts, lots of emails. How do I want to spend my time? And do I want to go to the work of arranging a time so that I'm having a book club with friends, or we're watching a show together and talking about it during commercials, or join a bowling club or whatever? Or do I want to just stay at home and scroll through something and where I have the opportunity to see that everybody else's highly curated life, their outsides look better than my insides, because we're aware of how messy and complex our insides are and how shiny everybody else's life looks on social media, that
Mm.
we do ourselves a disservice by picking what's easy rather than what is going to be nutrition dense in terms of relationships.
Yeah, path of least resistance, right?
Mhm.
And it's funny. We're filming this at about 1:30 p.m. and I haven't had lunch, and so I was getting kind of hungry. You talking about all your food comparisons? I'm like, my stomach's just growling. Um, yeah, so that it makes me when I put my hat on, or the filter of people who are maybe in sales, or they're trying to connect, and we throw around that word probably a
Mm.
little too liberally, right? Like, hey, just send you a quick email so we can connect, and really, you know, getting some. And I mean, in sales, it's tough to get people on the phone now. But how can we create more meaningful connections? In maybe we can talk about personal, but let's also touch on the professional side of things. Do you have tips for people to connect more deeply to maybe create business relationships, or that sort of thing?
Well, I think personal and professional, we like to think they're completely separate, but they're not, because when you spend 35, 40, 50 hours a week working, we get some of our personal needs for connection met through work. But I think there's a couple of things. First of all, I have spoken to a lot of people who are highly successful in business, often very high level leaders who are utterly and achingly lonely because they're so busy supporting other people and making sure the people's needs are met, checking in on their team, making sure business is going well, that nobody actually sees them, and there's no place where they can just sort of, sorry, I'm saying this to you, Anders, let their hair down metaphorically. Um,
Okay. I'm okay with that. Yeah.
where they can just sort of relax and be seen and have that sense of belonging. And I
Mm,
wonder if sales isn't a little bit like that, where you're working all the time of how can I make this relationship work for business and how can I be strategic? And so there's always an agenda when you're having those relationships.
yeah.
And that takes away from you just being able to show up authentically and say, here I am. This is what I'm struggling with, or this is how life is really going. Like you're always trying to put an angle on a bad day so that, you
Yeah.
can be strategic. And so I think being in sales, being in leadership, I think some of those positions are inherently lonely unless we give ourselves permission to say it's lonely. Because ironically, if people can say, I'm lonely to somebody else who's also lonely, in that moment, you're not lonely anymore.
Yeah. Mm,
And with one in
so
three people
sweet.
being lonely,
Yeah.
it's a fair bet that the person you're talking to either is lonely at that moment or has recently been lonely.
Hmm. Hmm. And it's interesting, this kind of warts and all, being vulnerable, you know, which flies in the face of, again, social media, and goes like a lot. I mean, some people do share on social media, but I'm just saying, um, we always want to present the right angle of things, right?
Sure.
We always want to, like, and yet what really connects us are, you know, those things that aren't perfect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when people see, and I think about, well, we were both speakers. I think sometimes too, we see sometimes a speaker, maybe they flub something or whatever, where you want to be so professional that it's perfect, but perfection is boring, and so when people see a little humanness, a little error, a little something, it can endear us to the audience. So there's something there, you know that we're not all perfect, and the more we admit that, the more we can feel connected to others. I see. I just want to know, how do you go about doing that without going too far? And then when I mean too far is, you know, you could turn people off if you kind of, I don't know, professed all your your issues out there. I don't know. And maybe that's me. Maybe that's me not being vulnerable enough. But like, do you know what I'm saying, Carolyn? And
Absolutely. And I think, when you're at work, you have to be on in a certain way, right?
Yeah.
You have to be professional. You want to be, and people are expecting that. And I think we've all been I don't know, I call it slimed, right? Where if
Mhm.
somebody is getting their personal needs met in a relationship that's supposed to be professional and they're asking for something from you which doesn't feel fair or appropriate and you're not quite sure what to do, we've all been feeling used in that sort of way. And
Yeah.
we don't want to give that to somebody else. I think the challenge is to figure out, and I love how you said, Anders, that in when you're speaking, if you flub and you kind of roll with it, and there's this moment of instant connection with the audience where people are like, oh, they're as human as I am, which
Mm,
brings a different sort of authenticity than when you present a highly curated story of your errors presented in a very funny and witty way. There's a place for that, but it doesn't have that same level of connection because they know that you've crafted it for them.
yeah. Yeah.
And so I think I think when you just sort of show up as yourself, um, and there's going to be some relationships where that are going to stay purely professional, and then there's going to be some where you're like, they get you, I get them, and we can take it to the next level, and we can both get good business done and feel like we've had a sense of belonging because they understand some of the same struggles I have because they're fighting the same battle as I am.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Like in this fear of vulnerability, you know, I mean, it's just interesting. I was on a podcast this morning, and the host was quite frank about sharing a panic attack that he had had on stage, and I was like, wow, that was very, big of him to do that. And we did talk a little bit about this, like, you know, this can happen to anyone. Like this has happened to, there's a you're going to know who this is too. An author who was like a weatherman or something. He wrote a book, but he was on TV and had a panic attack, and then he
Okay.
started meditating. And anyway, so he, but that kind of stuff can happen to people. This is my long-winded question. How do we get over that fear of vulnerability to get to this place so that we can better connect with people?
Well, Brene Brown defines vulnerability as uncertainty, fear, and emotional exposure. And I think when there's a unconscious or subconscious desire to avoid vulnerability because it has uncertainty and emotional exposure to it. And I think we can sort of do this manual override to say, I'm going to be real with this person because although I fear it's the last thing they want to see in me, it's actually the first thing I'm looking for in them. And so if I can understand that together we will actually meet in the raw and real better than we will be able to meet in the polished and perfect, that we can connect. And so it often involves saying, I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to go in and get real here and see what the impact is and get candid. I avoid the word honest because I think that implies if you're not candid, then you're dishonest. And I think often people aren't
Mm,
lying, but they're just, you know, trying to kind of cover up the really messy, ugly parts. And there's something beautiful about saying, I'm showing up with all of who I am. And it might
mm,
not be pretty or polished, but it is real. And I
mm.
think some of that vulnerability is best expressed in relationships, kind of one on one. Because when you're being vulnerable with 1,000 people, it doesn't have that same sense of personal connection where you invite that personal response.
Yeah.
And so sometimes with social media, people are putting up very vulnerable posts to the public, which doesn't, I think it's even harder to have go for coffee or go for a glass of wine with one person and say that same thing and hear and have a candid response with the other person and really hear what another person how they're responding to what it is that you're saying.
The
Very vulnerable.
intimacy that is, I guess, a proportionate response to what the issue is. And that's, I think you're right. When people just kind of go blah and throw things out of there on social media, you kind of go, whoa, like, and some of the people, I think the people who do relate to that are drawn to that person more. But it is a shotgun approach, and it's not going to be the right for everyone in a sense. But yeah, there's something else you said, and it's I'm gonna put it out there too, just because it's not quite right. But when you were kind of saying, like, meeting through vulnerability, there's like a Rumi, the poet, said something about beyond right doing and wrongdoing. There's a field, and I'll meet you there. And this
Mm,
kind of like, just there is this place where, yeah, our humanness coexists And, that's where we find, that connection. There's, anyways, I loved what you just said right now.
And I think that one-on-one encounter in this age of divisiveness and polarity is really important. Where
Yeah.
I was hearing, I don't know if he was right wing or left wing, American guy who was arguing against somebody in a public forum, and then the next day they met at the airport, and they had to wait 4 hours for their flight because there was delays. And as they ended up sitting beside each other, they found out that they actually had a lot in common, even though they had argued politically the day before on opposite ends of the spectrum. That the deeper you go, the more in common you find out that you really have with another person. But it involves sometimes time and investment and taking time and trusting the process, that sort of like not jumping into the 10-meter into vulnerability and intimacy, but wading in like a grand beach where you put in the time and you go
Yeah.
to that field where it isn't about don't doing right was what was the phrase you
Right
used?
doing and wrongdoing.
Wrongdoing, but just being with each other and finding an appreciation for that connection that it we've all had it. It's magical when you just have had a chance to spend time with somebody and you get to a place of intimacy. And you used that word before I did. That is beautiful. And intimacy is often a word that people are quite frightened of because in our world we've sexualized
Yeah.
intimacy.
Yeah.
And so people kind of get a little creeped out with that word, which I think is really unfortunate. I'd like us to recaptivate intimacy, and redefine it and reclaim it, to
Mhm.
have it be something that we want to pursue with a select number of people so that we can have authentic intimacy in a way that makes us, on average, social isolation is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The best predictor of health at
Uh,
80 is the quality of relationships at 50. It's not high blood pressure, it's not your cholesterol level, it's the kind of relationships that you have at 50 that will dictate statistically how healthy you are at 80. Good relationships that have intimacy in them matter
mhm.
practically, emotionally, physically, at every level. And we have to find ways of giving ourselves permission and the space and the mandate to pursue those relationships of deliberate intentionality.
Wow. So much to unpack there, Carolyn. In my mind, I've got like, I'm hanging these little topics on hooks. Like, I want to come back to that. Oh, shoot. I want to come back to that. Um, so now I got to like stop for a second. So one of them that I'll go most recent and I'll work backwards. Just
Okay.
it'll probably help me. I'm nearing 50. So all of a sudden I'm like, do I need more friends? Like a little pressure, but interesting takeaway that, yeah, that's that social network that you have and the real people that you hang out with. Um, yeah, as you age. So I like that. My wife just turned 50. I'm going to tell her that when I get home. Going back one step, we were talking about that person at the airport. These two people that were politically on opposite sides, and I think part of the problem too is all this online trolling and blah, just the back and forth, nipping back and forth at each other. You would never say some of these things if that person was right in front of you, like, and so I can see how the technology has created and also, bifurcated or, polarized, how we are, and seeing two sides of things. And so it also reminds me of a rapport exercise that I took in NLP one time where you are mirroring and matching someone else. And so you're really, in a way, getting in their head, right? Like your body mannerisms are similar, and you're trying to breathe the same as this person. And the exercise was you had to take two sides, take an argument, and each person took a side. And we did that before we were doing rapport, mirroring and matching. And then we started doing rapport. And son of a gun, we kept going like, hey, damn it, I just keep seeing it your way. Like we were trying not to to agree with the person, but when you start almost like a mind meld of some sort, right? Like you're getting that deep level of connection happening. While I'm talking about that, the rapport, meaning actual, breaking that down, is that something that you teach, or does that, I mean, teach or learn, or does that come naturally to you as a therapist? That side of things with,
Well,
talking Milton Erickson and that kind of rapport
yeah,
side of things.
I think what you're talking about is empathy, really, right? Where
Mhm.
you're understanding the other person's experience. The not only what they're saying, but what they're saying by what they're saying, their intended message, the experiential part, and really tuning into them. It's something that comes very naturally to parents with their children, where children don't necessarily have the language, and we have to really, what is it that these cries, what do these cries mean as opposed to those cries? But it doesn't, our need for empathy doesn't disappear when we develop language and we become adults. We are still looking for that sense of belonging, to be understood, to have a place to belong because we feel like somebody gets us. And
Mhm.
empathy is an underdeveloped skill by most people. It is, I used to teach it at the university to occupational therapy students for a bunch of years. And we would work at, what does this look like? And we would start off the mechanical, I see that you are feeling this because of this, right? And then
Mhm.
they say, that sounds so corny. Like, yeah, it does. It's the formula. And then after a while, it becomes more natural, where you connect before you correct, where you, before you challenge, you first try to understand their position. And social media in its algorithms looks to have only yourself understood and to hate the other. And I
Mhm.
think part of figuring out how we're going to get through this time of political divisiveness is finding ways to be empathic with each other. I'll tell you a funny story, which has something to do with sales, actually. I used to teach empathy to students at the university. And at the end of the semester, we would get together and we would talk. And somebody would say, as I've been practicing empathy with my 4-year-old, we've had less behavioral problems than we have in the last month and we had in the months before, right? And somebody else said, I think this empathy, this really understanding and having another person feel understood, experience being understood, not just by saying, I understand, but by letting them know how you see what they're feeling and what their position is and why it is that way, and really exploring and understanding that. She said, I took a shirt to return to a store, and I just kept hearing her dilemma about how she couldn't accept the return. She said, I actually had it returned against store policy because this empathy was so powerful that she did something she wasn't supposed to do. And she said, this empathy can be a superpower because when you really see somebody, it can be used for good or for evil. And we have to make sure that we don't misuse it because it's just that powerful.
That is a great story. Thank you for sharing that. And I mean, I just think that's almost a book right there, Carolyn, right? Empathy is a superpower. Boom. Right? Like, I mean, I mean, it's exciting. And I think some of these soft skills, just listening and understanding people, they don't get people aren't developing them as much because we are online, head down, shut down on our phone kind of thing. And so bringing us back to things that we used to do and know, and, generations before us, it's funny how what used to be ordinary is now becoming extraordinary, right? So
Yes.
empathy, and you're leading the way in helping us understand that. Um, so
And
can
that
you
that
tell?
actually brings us
Yeah,
back to the beginning, right? Where
yeah.
you didn't just text me about, I haven't seen you at any of the events lately. You called me.
Mm,
And there was that high touch uh, where we had a chance to actually communicate, because the world's tendency right now is to text because
yeah.
it's really easy to text, but it doesn't have that same sense of connection that
Yeah.
conversation does.
And I got to say, like, my daughter, her preferred form is texting, right? So I'm texting
Great.
back and forth. Um, but that's part of that kind of, platinum rule kind of idea, like not do what you would want, but what would they want, right? In
Mm.
terms of what is that medium you want to communicate in. I'm a big fan of one of the things we teach in our virtual engagement and some of the engagement courses is this hierarchy of communication, right? Like, just something written doesn't have any tone, it doesn't have any feeling. And so, a phone or virtual, you're getting a lot more, it's in real time, and you get a better sense of where people are coming from because of how they're saying things, right? So, that's what you mean by high touch, really, in a sense, right? Is that you're
Right.
getting more
And
senses.
not only are they getting the higher touch from you, but when you have a conversation, it's quite likely that your brain won't experience the same level will have more engagement, and you'll have less stress from it, and you'll get more satisfaction from that conversation
Yeah.
when you initiate it.
So for people listening, stop emailing and like, yeah, call someone or whatever. Like, just reach out and actually just, yeah. If everyone listening just called someone just to touch base, maybe that's a good takeaway. And then tell them to call someone to touch base and see how far that goes. I think, yeah, people are lonelier than they let on. Right. And so,
We were never meant to do this thing of life alone. We were meant to do it
mm,
in community, always, always. Uh, it wasn't that long ago when if you were pushed out of the tribe or out of the village, you'd be
yeah,
dead in a week, right?
yeah,
And our systems are designed and they need the nervous systems of other people around us to have us feel safe. And when we're
mm,
alone, our bodies feel danger.
yeah, yeah. It takes me back to and just and feeling the nurturing of others, right? Emotionally. Piece reminds me of what is that old psychology thing with the monkey and the poor monkey?
Yes,
That's horrible. But they had that wireframe mother. One was wrapped in terry cloth, and the other one didn't get a terry. Like, give the monkey a terry cloth mother at least, Like, but
that's John Bowlby. And that, like,
yeah,
that there's this, that the nurture was almost more important than the physical nutrition in terms of the baby being able to
yeah,
survive, right? Yeah.
unreal, unreal. Yeah, yeah. All these things we've learned, but somehow forgotten, or we're not embracing, and we need to be reminded, and we need to, just practice it more.
We do. We just need to be deliberate about it, right? If a person offers you a chocolate bar or a salad, the easy thing is to take the chocolate bar, but you should take the salad, right? And so
Yeah.
sometimes having a conversation about nutrition right before you make that option um, just reminds you about what's important. And I love that as a person you teach connection, right? You value connection, you live connection, that you have invited me to have this time of connection with you to
Yeah.
just highlight it to people who might listen.
Thank you so much for coming on. And I know, for one, I have a teenage daughter right now. Well, a teenage son as well, but a teenage daughter where I'm kind of like, I need to take a little bit of more empathy with me, and just, there's always every guest I have, if I can absorb a little bit of their genius, and take it with me, I think that's a good thing for me to do, and hopefully for our listeners, you do the same as well. So, Carolyn, thank you so much for coming on. How can people reach out to you if they want to get in touch?
Well, carolynklassen.com is a really good place to connect with me via email. I do speaking consultations, all sorts of workshops, things like that. And I just recently started the Loneliness Course, which is found at thelonelinesscourse.com, which moves people from isolation to connection. With 1 in 3 people being feeling lonely these days, where there's a mismatch between the kind of connection they need and the kind of connection they experience, there is no sort of just where a person will say, well, just go get a friend or just go out for coffee or just, right? If it was that easy, people would do it. And I think the loneliness course is intended to be a companion as people move from loneliness to connection, so that you can understand the brain science, the neurobiology, the impact of social media and technology on our relationships, and then have a deliberate plan to figure out how to engage in the very, it is now swimming upstream in order to become connected meaningfully in our world. In
Mm,
order to become engaged, you have to be countercultural. And everybody needs some support to do that. Nobody was ever meant to do this alone. So the loneliness course walks people to being able to do it not alone, by being a companion on the way.
awesome. Well, I'm glad you shared that, because maybe someone listening, this would be a good fit. And, again, we're not meant to do this alone. So thank you for being here. I very much appreciate the time that you spent and what you've shared here.
You are a gift, Anders, to the world. Thank you for you.
Oh, thank you. And thank you to all our listeners for tuning in. And until next time, you know what to do. Stay engaged. Thank you so much for listening to Engaging Personalities. If you believe this world needs more engagement, and you're an industry leader, or you have an interesting take on rehumanizing business, go to go.engagify.ai/podcast-guest to apply and come on the show. If you got something out of this interview, do you mind sharing it on your social media? Just grab a quick screenshot with your phone and text it to a friend or post it on the socials. If you know someone that would be a great guest, tag them on social media to let them know about the show. Include the hashtag Engaging Personalities. I love seeing your posts and guest suggestions. We are regularly putting out new episodes and content. To make sure you don't miss any episode, go ahead and subscribe. Your thumbs up, ratings, and reviews go a long way to help promote the show and mean a lot to me and my team. Want to know more? Go to our website, engageify.ai, or follow me on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening and stay engaged.